seek truth, question assumptions. And so I did. And as a young person, that seemed to lead me to atheism. When I was in college, there was this professor, I can't think of his name. Some of you have probably heard of him. He made the statement, he's a big atheist. He made the statement that it would be more morally acceptable to kill a newborn baby than an adult pig because pigs are more cognitively complex.
Jennifer Fulwiler is a comic who was raised atheist, and in the video that we're about to watch, you're going to hear the story of how she came to belief in God. I really hope that you guys enjoy this clip. For some reason, I found myself getting emotional listening to this. I think it's because it's very close to home for me. It's also very similar to how Whittaker Chambers came to God. If you know Whittaker Chambers from history, we're going to give a quote from him on the back end as well, where that is beautifully articulated in his testimony. Also, quick shout out to Bismarck Diocese, where this video originally came from, an aspiring Christian, where this condensed version of this story was first compiled. With that being said, let's dive in.
My dad would say, if he were here, and he actually thought about coming, which would have been weird. If he were here, I think that he would say that he did not raise me to be an atheist per se. He was really big on this idea of seek truth and question assumptions. Even if it's something that I, as your father, am telling you, question it, seek truth. And so that would end up being a very important part of my childhood, that it wasn't just we're atheists, so go be an atheist. It was seek truth, question assumptions. And so I did. And as a young person, that seemed to lead me to atheism. I went to college. I actually started out at a very religious public university, and I transferred to the University of Texas at Austin because it had a reputation for being very secular. At my previous university, it was like, they'd have Bible studies and stuff. And I got to UT and I thought, atheists. Yeah, this is much more like it. College atheists who I hung out with, and really even some of the professors, they were really a testament to just how much our education system has lost a sense of history when it comes to philosophy and the liberal arts. I mean, I would actually hear professors say things like, well, people belief in God started because people didn't know how to explain things before science. And that's the only reason anyone ever believes. And, now that I have studied a little bit of philosophy, I'm no expert, but now that I've just cracked the surface on it, I think, I cannot believe that people got away with saying that in an institution of higher learning. I mean, have you never read the ancient Greek philosophers? I mean, you might not agree with them, but there's this whole wealth of knowledge that they were not drawing from. And what it reminds me of is one of my very favorite quotes ever, sums up this whole phenomenon. It was the London Review of Books. Their review of, I believe it was The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, otherwise known as your atheist relative's favorite book, I'm sure. What they said of The God Delusion: imagine someone holding forth on biology whose only knowledge of the subject is the British Book of Birds, and you have a rough idea of what it feels like to read Richard Dawkins on theology. I love that. And that really perfectly encapsulates what I experience among atheists, even in a university setting. But I began to notice some problems would come up that people couldn't really answer that well. For example, someone asked one time in an atheist group that I was meeting with, how do we know that it's the right thing to do to be a good person, for example, to just, give back to others, maybe volunteer at a homeless shelter? Because the group that I was with, they were really into that. They really did want to be good people, like my parents, serve the community, give back. And so they said, from an atheistic point of view, obviously we're not like those silly Christians whose God tells them what to do. But so how do we know that it's the right thing to do? And the person in the room who was considered, very intellectual and knowledgeable said, oh, well, yes, if you look at evolution, you can see that humans thrive. They function best when they are in peaceful communities. It leads to harmony, and therefore we have a gene. It's hardwired into us to seek peaceful communities. But I was sitting there thinking, well, yeah, but you can also look at the evidence from evolution to see that evolution kind of favors survival of the fittest too, the strong dominating the weak. So it seems like from a purely atheist materialist perspective, you could also concoct a moral code in which beating up the weak and the poor and stealing their stuff so that you can be rich and your offspring can survive, seems like that could also be perfectly justifiable from the atheist materialist perspective. And when I would bring up these issues to some, there were a lot of discussions, but one summary of the typical response I got was along the lines of, shut up. So a year later, our first child was born, and that was the real starting point of my conversion. You can see that the stage had kind of already been set. I was already thinking a certain direction. But when I held that baby, that was the first moment of realizing that there were some real problems with atheism and that it was time to address them. Because, in the spirit of another thing that my dad always taught me was this idea of follow your beliefs to their logical conclusions. Don't just say you believe something, but then don't walk the walk when the going gets tough. You have to follow your belief to their logical conclusions. And so I held my newborn son, this amazing miracle, and I was like, what a gorgeous, randomly evolved set of chemical reactions. What is this? Atheism is nonsense. What is this? Because I remembered that when I was in college, there was this professor, I can't think of his name. Some of you have probably heard of him. He made the statement, he's a big atheist. He made the statement that it would be more morally acceptable to kill a newborn baby than an adult pig because pigs are more cognitively complex. And that has stayed with me all those years, because at the time that I read that paper, I was like, this is garbage. He's making atheists look bad. And I was like, that is wrong because, essentially complexity is how you derive value. And I looked at my newborn son and I thought, pigs are pretty smart. The pig is more cognitively complex than this newborn. And I realized that by my own atheist materialist worldview, I was saying that my baby was not as valuable as an adult human being because he was not as cognitively complex. So that was wrong. I sensed this love that I felt for him. And again, in the spirit of being, intellectually honest, I said, okay, where does this love come from that I'm experiencing? I thought, well, it's just a feeling. It's just chemical reactions in my brain. And I thought, that's not true. That is not true. I know that the love that I feel for my son and that I've experienced in this little family of ours has a source that is somewhere outside of us. I don't know what it is. I don't know who it is. But I know that it's there. And that if the whole world blew up tomorrow and there was nothing left of us, that love would still be real and it would still exist. 7 months went by and I had actually kind of forgotten about it. And then a funny thing happened. I was going to a bookstore to, find some reading to pass the time. I had no particular agenda. And it was a weird thing. As I was walking in the store, the only way I can describe it is to say that it's almost like there was a light on this one book at the back of the room. There wasn't literally, but I was so drawn to this book. And I just had to go see what it was. And so I had my baby with me and I pushed the stroller back there. And I laughed when I saw that it was in the Christianity section. The last time I was in the Christianity section of anything was when I was in the 4th grade. I took the Bibles in our library and I put them in the fiction section, which I thought was like the most edgy atheist joke the whole 4th grade had ever seen. But I hadn't been back to the Christianity section since. And I was about to walk away, but then I saw that the book was called The Case for Christ. And there was some tagline or something that said that the author used to be an atheist. And I thought oh, that's ridiculous. This will be fun, take this book apart. That's, this is just going to be absurd. And I found that the book was actually not too bad. And one of the things is that I noticed this guy spoke my language. In The Case for Christ, I'll just give you one example of a point that he made through interviews with Christian experts. He made some points that just kind of got me thinking. I wasn't convinced, but they got me thinking. For example, this a Protestant philosopher named J.P. Moreland, Strobel interviewed him, and this guy pointed out that what you see when you look at first century Palestine is that there were all these Jews that for centuries, through unspeakable unspeakable persecution they had held to these religious and social structures, such as animal sacrifice and keeping the Sabbath, and nothing, not the worst persecution that the world could throw at them would get them to let go of these customs. And this is a quote from him in The Case for Christ. He says, these Jews, they believed that to abandon these institutions would be to risk their souls being damned to hell after death. Now, a rabbi named Jesus appears from a lower class region. He teaches for 3 years, gathers a following of lower and middle class people, gets in trouble with the authorities, and gets crucified along with 30,000 other Jewish men who are also executed during that period. But 5 weeks after he's crucified, over 10,000 Jews are following him and claiming that he is the initiator of a new religion. And get this, they're willing to give up or alter all 5 of the social institutions that they have been taught since childhood have such importance, both sociologically and theologically. And Moreland says, and it's kind of hard to argue with, you have to admit that something explosive happened to Jewish culture in first century Palestine. Atheist or Christian, you have to admit something happened. And his own explanation was simple. They'd seen Jesus risen from the dead. Got me thinking.
All right, so to land the plane, I want to read you guys a quote here from this book by Whittaker Chambers called Witness, who again was the person testifying against Alger Hiss, who was one of the key creators of the United Nations, but who was also a communist spy during the Cold War, working inside of the United States, as was Whittaker Chambers at that time. But Whittaker Chambers defected from the Communist Party because of a belief in God. But what led to his belief in God was this amazing moment, this quote that incited the rest of these historic events. And here's what the quote says. I was sitting in our apartment in St. Paul Street in Baltimore. It was shortly before we moved to Alger Hiss's apartment in Washington. Again, Alger Hiss, one of the creators of the United Nations. My daughter was in her high chair. I was watching her eat. She was the most miraculous thing that had ever happened in my life. I liked to watch her even when she smeared porridge on her face or dropped it meditatively on the floor. My eye came to rest on the delicate convolutions of her ear, those intricate, perfect ears. The thought passed through my mind. No, those ears were not created by any chance coming together of atoms and nature, which was the communist view. They could have been created only by immense design. The thought was involuntary and unwanted. I crowded it out of my mind. I never wholly forgot it or that occasion, though. I had to crowd it out of my mind. If I had completed it, I should have had to say, design presupposes God. If you guys are interested in these types of stories, these types of thoughts about God, is God real? Can God really break through to my life in this way? Is true freedom, true abundant life really possible? If you guys are interested in taking a deeper dive and taking another step, I'm going to recommend this video right here, which was about an hour-long conversation that I was able to have with John Lennox, who is an Oxford mathematician and really a brilliant, winsome person. Check out this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye.